It's story time again. This time I thought it might be fun to write a story from the point of view of a villain. I'm going to go ahead and issue a disclaimer here. I do not condone anything that this man says or thinks or does. He's a bad person. I've been using third person limited lately to give my stories a little bit more immediacy. You know, third person is usually known as the omniscient point of view. You can go anywhere, you can see in anybody's head, but third person limited limits you to one or two characters. I've been limiting it to one character. So even the narrator of this short story is a POS. He just, because he lives in the villain's head. There is no other point of view but the villain's point of view. I just wanted to say ahead of time, I mean, this guy's, he's a bigot of every kind. He's a bigot, he's a racist, a sexist, a homophobe. He's a bad person, and he kills people, of course. It's not the worst thing he does is being racist. I mean, it's terrible, but he also kills people. You know, so know that I do not condone, this is not a glorification of anything. It's just an interesting character study, all right? So I hope you enjoy. The Good Neighbor. James paced back and forth nervously. He chewed on his fingernail and mumbled to himself. Not my fault. Not my fault, he repeated to himself. The night was clear and hot. The humid air made James's skin feel greasy. He was already sweating as he had been watching for his neighbor to drive off in his brand new 1954 Cadillac Eldorado. It always made James's ears hot to see that little Poindexter freak driving in that beautiful car. James refused to believe that his neighbor deserved such a machine. The freak left trash in the back seat all the time, and not just papers. There was a broken milk jug stuffed under the passenger seat. Someone should rip that car away from him, give it to someone who actually worked for a living, someone who earned it. James paced back and forth in his backyard, getting ready to prove everything. The air was pregnant and bloated. It really needed to shit out a storm. The air would be lighter, and then he wouldn't have to sweat so hard. He reached into his pocket for his cigarettes. One more smoke. Then I'll go, he mumbled to himself. He had to prove it. No one believed him, but that freak was evil. Whatever he got up to behind closed doors was sick. He could feel it in his bones. He would finally know. He would finally have proof. He would finally have his answers. It had been a breezy April day when a large moving truck pulled up at the big house at the end of the lane. It was the biggest house in the neighborhood, and it was old. No one had lived there in years. Its Victorian-looking design was lost on James. He knew nothing about architecture. He just knew it was handsome and twice the size of his modern house in his modern neighborhood. The Victorian house was at the end of the suburban development and technically wasn't part of the neighborhood at all. It was much older than the other houses here. The property came with 4 acres of empty field around it that held endless possibilities. James desired it. He could build his own shop with the extra land, and he'd really have made it. It was important to have goals, and James's goal was to be the man in charge like he deserved. No more doing oil changes on jalopies while the man who ran the garage made the real money. Forget about a rainstorm. The storm inside James had been brewing for months, and lightning was about to strike. He was prepared to take the final step on the darkest of paths. But when he first learned that someone would be moving into the Victorian house at the end of the lane, he had felt nothing but joy and anticipation. It had all turned and gone so wrong after that. Now all James wanted was justice. James watched from his upstairs window as strong men moved everything into the house. Weeks before that, there had been the carpenters, painters, and electricians to restore the house and make it look new again. Just that morning, the plumbers had finished, and now someone was moving in. James, I'm going to be late tonight, Judy said as she breezed by the bedroom door. The new neighbor owns a telescope, he shouted. Judy didn't reply. She didn't care about the new neighbor. She should be excited. She should be ready to do the job of a good wife and bake a cake or at least a Jell-O mold. It's not every day that they got a new neighbor. The last new one was Bill. He was okay. He worked on air conditioning ducts and at least drank the same beer as James. But they were nothing alike. Bill was stupid and lazy. James had been really disappointed after getting to know him. Bill didn't even vote. He wasn't the friend that James deserved. James knew he deserved someone who appreciated him, and that's what the new neighbor would be. He'd make sure. When the moving truck drove off in the early evening, James's excitement was palpable. He waited by the door for the owner to pull up in his car and enter the Victorian house. But around 6 o'clock, James felt a pit grow in his stomach. No one was coming tonight. James cursed and started pacing back and forth in front of his window. How much longer would he have to wait? It wasn't fair that his only friend was Bill. Sure, Judy was a keen lady, but she always talked down to him, always belittled his desires and ambitions. James was ambitious and driven. She just sat at a desk all day and typed. She shouldn't even have a job. It was Mr. McMiller's fault. If he hadn't canned James from the garage, she could have stayed around at home where she belonged, and he wouldn't have to have had his Cadillac repossessed. McMiller was a stupid, short-sighted. James's ears and face got hot just picturing his potato-eating face. He never listened to James. James always had good ideas, like the time he wanted to put wider hoses on the gas pumps so they could pump gas faster and therefore serve more customers. He had even used his day off to buy all the hoses and adapters so he could install them right away, but that dumb Mick had shot him down. Said the hoses had to be regulation or some stupid shit. Couldn't he see that James was right? James needed to cool down. He walked out of his bedroom, down the stairs, and out of his house. He knew Bill would be sitting in the lawn chair on his driveway, drinking beer like always. He crossed the wide, perfectly paved street in long strides. "Hey, Jimmy!" Bill called out as he reached into his cooler and grabbed a Miller for James. James sat down on the other long chair and took the beer in his hand. He used the bottle opener on his keyring and took a long pull of the bitter brew. "You see that telescope?" James said to Bill. "Huh? What telescope?" Bill said with slurred speech. "The new neighbor. God damn, haven't you been paying attention to anything?" "You talk about what they took out of that moving truck?" "No, Bill, I'm talking about the one delivered by Martians," James said sarcastically. "Huh, Martians. Good one, Jimmy," Bill chuckled as he polished off his beer. "I bet he's smart like me," James said. "I should get a telescope too so we can watch the stars together." "And keep a lookout for Martians," Bill joked. James was sure the new neighbor would understand him. Bill reminded James of a talking beer bottle, sloshing around full of yellow liquid and nothing up top except for bubbles. It was 2 more days before something else happened at the Victorian house. He was already awake early that morning. Judy was vacuuming before work. She should have waited until he had gotten up. She'd always been a rude woman, never thinking about him before doing things, like getting that damn job. She never asked him about anything anymore. He got up after being silently furious in bed for about an hour. He immediately went to the window to look at the Victorian house. His jaw dropped. There was a construction crew starting work for the day. They were on the side acreage of the house, putting down boards to lay cement. What the hell were they building? How much work did the new neighbor need to be done before he could just move into the damn house? He walked away from the window and downstairs. Judy was just turning off the vacuum cleaner and winding up the cord. "What the hell, Julie?" he barked at her. "What?" she said defensively. "Don't take that tone with me. You should have made sure I was already awake before using that damn thing." "James, I have to work in an hour, and if I don't do this, no one will," she said and rolled her eyes. "You should just quit that stupid job. You're needed here." "We're already a month behind on the mortgage, James," Judy said and turned to go into the kitchen. "I'll have a new job any day. No need for a woman to work," James said as his face got hotter. "You need to actually get up and look for a job in order to get one, not lay in bed all day and obsess about the new neighbor." "It's not my fault. Maybe if I wasn't up late every night waiting for you to get home, I'd get enough sleep to get up early." "I keep telling you, you don't need to do that," she called from the kitchen. "Oh, I'm sure you'd love that. No one to keep track of what time you come in? That way you'd be free to cat around with the other ladies in the secretary pool," James yelled. Judy was finally getting mad. She stopped whatever it was she was doing in the kitchen and stood there for a second. Inside, James was smiling, but his face was getting redder by the second. "Good," he thought. "She knows how I feel." She turned to him. "You know what, James?" she started to say, but stopped. "Never mind. I'm not going to let you get to me. I have to work." She dropped her arms down to her side and started walking towards the garage. James wanted to fight more, but he was in a hurry. He had to eat something so he could get back to the window. Judy went out and he could hear her get in the car and drive away. At least she had made coffee. Useless woman, he scoffed to himself. For the next week, he watched the new neighbor's house. Day by day, the construction progressed. He was overjoyed to see that the concrete had been for a huge steel building. He was sure that it was the garage. Maybe he could work with the new neighbor and not have to humiliate himself by looking for a new job. What other reason did he need for that big of a building for, if not for machines of some kind? Once the building had been finished, the workmen had gone home for the day. James went out to inspect the building. He walked around its corrugated walls. He was disappointed to see on the far side of the building, where there was supposed to be garage doors, there was only a small, regular door. James looked around to see if anyone was looking. Bill was the only one around, and he seemed more interested in the radio that sat on his lap. James tried the door. It was locked. He pushed against the door hard as he tried the handle again. No use. It was steel and deadbolted. There were no exterior lights yet, and no light coming from the house. James considered trying to gain entry into the house, but thought better of it. It was not something a good neighbor would do. The next day, Judy had off. They had another fight. The stupid woman refused to bake a cake for the new neighbor. He was upstairs fuming about it. There was a new work crew putting up fences around the entire property. Not normal fences either. These were chain link fences and almost as high as his upstairs windows. What was the new neighbor trying to protect? James realized that whatever was in that warehouse must be valuable. It was another 2 days before it finally happened. It was Sunday, and the afternoon sun was burning hot. He sat in his lawn chair drinking cold beers with Bill. James's companion was hypnotized by the tiny voice coming out of his transistor radio. The boring ball game droned on as Bill's jaw hung open stupidly. There was a glint of something coming down the road. As James turned his head, he saw a lipstick-red car slowly floating down the lane like it was on a cushion of air. It seemed otherworldly as its chrome glinted in the sunlight. It was a 1954 Cadillac Eldorado. Its sleek, streamlined body oozed with that new paint gloss. James's heart almost stopped when it looped around and finally came to a halt in front of the Victorian house, with the driver's door pointed towards the curb. James couldn't see the new neighbor step out of the car, but it didn't matter. He bolted up out of the lawn chair, knocking it over and making Bill almost drop his precious radio. "Hey!" Bill cried out as James ran across the street. He was so excited his tongue was tingling. Judy had given him hell about buying a telescope, but it was worth every penny. She had tasted the back of his hand that day. He wouldn't let her sabotage this. He ran up into the bedroom where the welcome cookies he had acquired were stashed in the back of the closet. He looked out his window just in time to see the neighbor's front door close. He stopped for a moment and caught his breath. Was he getting too excited? This man was a stranger. No, James knew that his new neighbor would be a kindred spirit. He smiled and then ran downstairs. He halted at his front door and gathered himself. He had to be casual, relaxed. He's just meeting a new old friend. He looked in the mirror in the telephone nook and saw his wild eyes. He closed them and looked in the mirror again. Cool and collected, he thought to himself. He opened the door and strode out. His heart was in his throat as he walked up to the door of the Victorian house. He ran his hand through his hair once before crisply knocking. A few seconds passed and there was no reply. James knocked again. After at least 30 seconds, there was no response. Suddenly, James had the urge to turn around and walk home. He didn't want to press himself too hard on the stranger. It's fine. He's probably on the can, James thought. He took a deep breath and rapped much harder on the door and waited. After a few seconds, he heard noises inside. Through the thick, distorted glass on the front door, he saw movement. Someone was coming to the door. James smiled. 3 deadbolts turned and clacked before the door opened a quarter of the way. James could see a round face with glasses peering at him through the crack. "Yes, can I help you?" came a soft voice. "Hey, buddy, I'm your new neighbor," James beamed. "Oh, pleased to meet you," he said as he adjusted his glasses and looked up at James. He opened the door wider, and James could see he was about 5'4", middle-aged, and going bald. He wore a white linen suit and had large brown eyes that seemed to be magnified by the lenses of his glasses. James thrust the tin of cookies into the startled man's hands. "My name is James. I just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." The strange little man looked at the cookies in a confused way and then stuttered, "I'm Samuel." "Pleased to meet you, Samuel. Say, I was wondering if you might want to grab a brew and listen to the game with me and Bill over there. He's been real excited about having a new neighbor." "Game?" Samuel said and craned his neck to look over at Bill. "Yeah, baseball and brews. Who could say no to that?" James was really piling on the charm. Samuel quite Samuel wasn't quite what James had expected, but appearances didn't matter. He continued to grin down at the strange-looking man. Samuel looked up into James's eyes for a moment before awkwardly looking back down at the cookies. "Oh, I'm quite sorry. I'm busy. I have a lot of work to do." "Oh, I'm sure that can wait. Come on, have a beer," James said, motioning to Bill, who had finally noticed that people were looking at him. "No, I'm afraid I can't," Samuel said more firmly. "My work is time sensitive, but it was very nice to meet you. Thank you for the snacks." Samuel began to retreat back into the house and started to close the door. James grabbed the door as he did. "Whoa, hold up there, buddy. I'm putting my best foot forward here, and you're not being very neighborly. What do you say about tomorrow? I bet I could get my wife to make you a nice home-cooked meal. I bet that would be nice after all the stress of moving." Samuel looked up at James's hand on the door. He then looked James directly in the eyes. There was a moment of awkward silence as Samuel seemed to look at James seriously for the first time. His eyes squinted, and then he sighed and looked away. "I'm not trying to be rude. I mostly keep to myself. I enjoy my work, and I have a lot of work to do today and every day. I'm sorry, I don't know what you expect of me," he said softly but sternly. "You can have your cookies back if you want." James felt a knot begin to grow in his stomach. "Well, you are being rude. I bought a telescope and everything, buddy. We are nice folk around here. I'm doing you a favor." Stanley looked him in the eyes again, genuinely confused. "Why would you buy a telescope?" James felt his ears get hot. His heart was beating faster and his jaw felt stiff. "You know what? Forget it. I invited you into my home and I'm the asshole? You better watch your back, buddy. This whole neighborhood will turn on you if you're not careful," James said, seething with his teeth clenched together. Samuel didn't break eye contact. "I think it's time for you to go before I call the police." "The police? Oh, that's swell. You don't know the cops around here. I do. Who do you think they'll believe? Me, a pillar of the community, or you, an outsider little freak?" James didn't know anyone at the police station, but he was thinking it was about time for that to change. "Let go of my door," Samuel said firmly, and as he said it, the sun glinted off something metal. Samuel was holding a little snub-nosed revolver at hip height, pointing it at the floor. James laughed nervously and let go of the door. He took a few steps back, shaking his head. "Oh, so you do have a little bit of spine. You're going to regret this. Mark my words." James turned around and started marching home, his blood boiling. That little Poindexter sure had some nerve. "Pull a gun on me?" he muttered under his breath. "He'll regret this." And James walked to the door to his house, slamming it as hard as he could. Up the stairs he thundered and straight to the window in his bedroom. He looked down at the complex built up around the Victorian house. "He's got to be hiding something," he said to no one. "Let's see how you like the inside of a jail cell, you little freak. I'm a good neighbor, damn it. The cops won't believe you over me." James stormed out of the bedroom and down to the telephone, promptly telling the operator to call the police. When he finally got an officer on the line, he was fit to be tied with anger. "Officer, you need to come down here immediately. My new neighbor is a lunatic. I offered him cookies and he pointed a gun at me. That little freak is hiding something. I'm sure of it. You need to search his house and find out what it is." The officer at the end of the line asked for the address, and James provided it. When the officer tried to ask another question, James immediately interrupted him. "I think he's out to get me. You need to come and arrest him before I'm a dead man." James slammed down the receiver. "There, that should put some pep in their step." He went back upstairs and stared out the window. After a few seconds, he started pacing back and forth across the bedroom, walking up to the window to look at Samuel's house and then to the one on the other side of the bedroom to try and catch a glimpse of the police coming down the road. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally saw a squad car rolling down the lane. James bunched his hands into fists with glee. He pulled the blinds up on his bedroom so he would have a completely unobstructed view of the Victorian house. The police car stopped and two men got out. One was fat and the other one was tall and skinny. They casually walked up to Samuel's door and knocked. "Garland City Police," they called out loud enough for James to hear. After a few seconds, the door opened. He couldn't see Samuel's face, but James imagined Samuel was scared. "Oh, you surprise, asshole," James hissed with spite. After a good 10 minutes, nothing had happened. They were just talking. "Go inside! Arrest that bastard!" James yelled. The police, however, kept talking innocently. James was pressing his face against the window as if that would allow him to see better what was going on. He caught a flash of Samuel looking out of the door for a moment in the direction of his house, and the two officers looked right up at his window. "What the hell?" James said in disbelief. The officers continued to just stand there and do nothing. James had had it. He stomped out of his bedroom and out the door. "Hey! Hey!" he yelled and began to briskly walk towards the police. They immediately turned towards him, and one rested his hand threateningly on his duty belt. "Stop!" called out the fat one. "You need to arrest that man!" James cried out. "Sir, you need to calm down," said the skinny one. "Don't tell me to calm down! That man almost shot me!" James yelled while jabbing his finger towards Samuel repeatedly like driving a knife into the air. "Go back into your house, sir," said the skinny one. "We'll speak with you in a moment." "No, you'll talk to me now, or you do want me to call your supervisor?" The fat one started walking towards James. "Okay, you need to back off right now, or you'll end up in cuffs, buddy." "Me? He's the one waving guns around!" James exclaimed. The skinny one reached behind his back and produced a pair of handcuffs. The reality suddenly dawned on him that he was about to get publicly humiliated, grabbed and cuffed. "Oh, the neighbors love that," he mumbled to himself. "What was that?" asked the skinny one. "Officer, I apologize for my outburst. I'm just upset. That man treated me rudely. Not to mention, I'm sure he's hiding something in that big warehouse around back. Who needs that big of a fence? Shouldn't it be against the Homeowners Association guidelines?" A few of the other neighbors have complained about his construction. It turns out he's outside the Homeowners Association's jurisdiction. "He built everything on unincorporated land," said the fat one in a condescending tone. James's face was hot, but he swallowed his anger. "You should still have a look," James said. "Look, Mr. Smith hasn't done anything wrong," said the fat one, closing the distance to James. He spoke again, this time more quietly. "Look, James, you should be more concerned about what goes on under your own roof. Leave your neighbor alone." "What's that supposed to mean?" James said, taken aback. "It means your wife's place of employment won't ignore one of their employees showing up to work with black eyes and bruises all over. I understand you trying to keep your woman in line, but you can't keep doing what you're doing. Your wife refused to corroborate her office's concerns. If she had signed a statement against you, you'd already be in jail." James stood in the heat of the day, but he felt cold inside, humiliated and betrayed. "Damn that little freak. Damn him for getting me this worked up," James said in his mind. James, do we have an understanding?" asked the skinny one. James nodded his head. "Yes," he said with no emotion. "Okay, sir, I think it's time you went inside. Mr. Smith isn't pressing charges for you trying to force your way into his house. Next time you bother your neighbor, we will have no choice but to arrest you. Do you understand?" asked the skinny one. James said nothing. His hands were shaking. He felt like there was ice water running down his back. "You are not to approach or bother your neighbor again, or you will be placed under arrest. Do you understand?" asked the skinny one again. James nodded and said, "Yes, I understand." "Good," said the fat one. They turned around and started heading towards their squad car. James turned around himself and headed back into his house. He hadn't felt this humiliated since the time his father had whipped him with a belt in front of his whole kindergarten class. His rage was changing. His face and ears still felt hot, but a new coldness was taking over. He had wandered upstairs without even thinking about it. He stood in front of the bedroom window, not even looking at what was in front of him. Felt miserable and emasculated. His hands were balled up in fists, and he was now shaking all over. "Useless," he whispered before slapping himself across the face. "Useless," he yelled and punched himself in the head repeatedly and violently. "Useless," he screamed at the top of his lungs. "Fuck pigs!" They would pay, all of them. If those spineless cops didn't want to do something about Samuel, he would have to find another way to prove what he felt in his gut. Judy would get hers too, but not right away. He'd wait until things died down, until they'd forgot about her bruises. Besides, he didn't have time for Judy. He had to deal with Samuel first. Somehow he had to find something to prove that Samuel was up to something. "Yes, swallow the anger. Let it fester," he said with shaky breaths. "Just like with Dad. Wait until he least expects it, then strike." The next day he stood at the window again. He was awake at dawn, even before Judy was up. He couldn't sleep. He was up all night, turning everything around in his head with a simmering rage. Samuel was up too. Lights were turned on through the Victorian house, and he could sometimes catch the short silhouette of Samuel moving around behind shaded windows. "Why does he keep all the shades down on such a sunny day?" he mumbled once the sun was fully in the sky. At around noon, Samuel exited the back of his house and entered the large building behind it. Large machines on the roof spun up and began droning away. Were they for air conditioning? There were two huge units that looked identical, and one was smaller but seemed similar in nature. "That's a lot of cooling for one small building," James thought. As the day plowed on, a mail truck delivered 4 large packages to the neighbor's door. Samuel somehow knew they had arrived even from his back building. He signed for the packages. When the mailman left, he appeared out of his front door with a furniture dolly. James watched as Samuel took each wooden crate through the house and into the back building. "What's he building in there?" was the question hammering inside James' skull over and over. The next day there was a much bigger single crate from the mailman. Then around 2 hours later, a massive delivery vehicle arrived. The crates were so big that Samuel had to open his fence. The delivery man helped Samuel move the crates to the far side of the back building. James craned his neck and even stood on his tiptoes, but it was no use. He couldn't see what was being done with the crates. He needed another angle. The cold anger inside him was bubbling up again. James seemed perfectly calm on the outside. He wasn't shaking, his face wasn't red, but as he passed the mirror by the telephone, he could see the wild look in his own eyes again. "Swallow it. Let it fester like a wound," James mumbled at his reflection. He strode out the door. Bill wasn't home from work yet, but the 2 lawn chairs were always sitting in the driveway. James strolled casually across the street and sat down. He could now see glimpses of the 2 men outside the back building, but it was not enough to see what was happening. He picked up the lawn chair and walked it to the edge of Bill's lawn where his property ended. As he did, the delivery man walked out and Samuel handed him a tip. The delivery man beamed and got back in his truck. As it pulled away, Samuel swung the huge gate of the fence closed. "What's he building in there?" James murmured and squinted his eyes. The only way to see what was in those crates would be to go around the back of the property. He couldn't do that in broad daylight. He had to be patient. It was midnight by the time Samuel finally turned out the light in the upstairs bedroom of the Victorian house. James had snuck into that house several times before it had been bought by anyone. He always imagined it would be him that would buy that house once he finally opened his own auto shop. "Four-eyed little freak, you think you deserve that house, but you're wrong. You didn't earn it, you're just loaded. Paying for things isn't the same as earning them." James looked down at Samuel's Cadillac sitting under the streetlight. It was as beautiful as Marilyn's smile. James's Cadillac hadn't been nearly as nice. He only had a working man's pay. Damn McMiller. Someday he'd show that potato eater how a garage is meant to be run. He glowered at the Cadillac. Samuel would feel the sting of loss when he went to jail. Then Samuel couldn't pay for his shiny new car either. James turned around. Judy was quietly sleeping. In the moonlight, he watched her sleep. For a moment, he was distracted by her beauty. Even with her auburn hair and curlers, she was still a looker. Her pale, pearlescent skin and her naturally pink lips made James forget about his rage for a moment. He smiled despite himself, but that smile faded away when her voice played in his mind. Condescending and rude, that's what she was. He had tried to teach her respect, but it always ended up with her painting him as the bad guy somehow. There would be time for taming the shrew, but that time wasn't now. He picked up his shoes and quietly snuck out of the bedroom. Judy had gotten used to him not sleeping in the bed. When he reached the back door, he put on his shoes. He kept the back porch light off as he slipped over to his fence. After listening for any cars, he quickly scaled the fence and dropped down on the little row of grass that separated his fence from Samuel's. James pressed his face against the chain-link fence and saw that all the lights were off around the Victorian house. He quietly moved around the perimeter as he tried to find the entrance to the back building. As he navigated through the outside of the chain-link fence, he had to push through thorny mesquite trees covered in vines. He made much more noise than he intended. The various branches cracked as he pushed past them. He almost tripped several times on the thick, creeping vines. Once he was in position to look at the area where the boxes had been dropped off, he could see that they were empty. The wooden tops were laying on the ground, and all that was left inside was straw. He needed some clue as to what Samuel was up to. He knew all the doors would be locked, and he wasn't anxious to have the cops in his business again. He stood in the gloom, thinking hard about what to do next. People had a right to know what that Poindexter was up to. He had a right to know. People had a right to their privacy under the damn Constitution, but arrogant little pricks like Samuel exploited that, and therefore deserved to be exposed. He started shaking again a little. His heart was in his throat, and his tongue was tingling. He remembered Samuel looking at him through those Coke bottle glasses. "Why did you buy a telescope?" Samuel's doughy face looked at James mockingly. There was nothing else to do but climb the fence. James slipped off his shoes so that his toes could grab the fence better. He grabbed onto the steel linkage and up he climbed. He hadn't climbed a fence like this since he was a kid. His feet hurt from his bare feet grasping the fence. It was more difficult than he remembered. Grunting, he continued to work up the fence. Finally, he reached the top of the fence, panting and out of breath. He looked down and marveled. He was at eye level with the second floor of the Victorian house. It was a long way down. Something hot was blowing in his face. He squinted in the darkness. There was a vent pipe in the top of the back building, and it was steadily pumping out a small amount of steam. It smelled a bit like bleach or some other chemical. Suddenly the light switched on, flooding the entire property with light. Startled, James's toes slipped off the fence, and his arms let go from the sudden drop. He fell like a stone onto a tree root, impacting the small of his back. "God damn it!" he hissed in the darkness. He scrambled to his feet and tore through the viney trees. He ran the second he was free and leapt up his own fence, dropping behind it safely. He lay on his back, panting for a few moments. Had he been seen? Samuel could be calling the police right now, he thought to himself. He sat up with a groan. His back hurt, but he needed to see what was going on. "Shit," he cursed. He had left his shoes by the fence. He quietly made his way through the back door and silently padded upstairs to the bedroom window. He peeked out of the Venetian blinds and could see Samuel standing in a dressing gown in the middle of his property, shining a flashlight with one hand and his pistol in the other. James gritted his teeth. The little rat almost caught him. He'd have to be more careful next time. If Samuel hadn't startled James, then he would have found some lead, or maybe some answer, as to what Samuel was building. In James's mind, he imagined his hands tightening around Samuel's neck. He imagined feeling the soft flesh giving way under his grip, and Samuel struggling against him, pushing with his tiny arms against James's overwhelming power. James opened and closed his hands anxiously. He stared at Samuel in his stupid little blue robe, and Samuel turned and looked directly at James's window. The lights were all out in James's house, so there was no way for Samuel to see him, but James felt exposed. For a full half a minute, Samuel looked at the bedroom window. James stared back out of the blackness. Then Samuel turned around and headed back into his house. James exhaled. He hadn't even realized he was holding his breath. After a minute or so, he saw Samuel's silhouette in the bedroom again. He switched off the bedroom light, but left all the other lights inside and outside of the house on. "That's right. Keep looking over your shoulder," James thought to himself. "Keep looking. I'm coming up behind you. I'm going to smash that stupid look off your face." The lights would stay on all night. Eventually, James went downstairs and laid down on the sofa in the living room. He tossed and turned all night. His skin was itching and he couldn't help scratching. To ease the frustration, he imagined killing Samuel in more and more elaborate ways through the night. James, wake up," Judy said as James lay on the couch. "James, wake up, you're red all over." "What?" James asked groggily. He looked at his arms, and they were covered with a red rash. "What the hell were you up to last night? You look like you rolled in a pile of poison ivy," Judy said in that annoying, accusatory way. "Nothing. I did nothing last night," James lied. "Then how did you get that rash?" "None of your damn business, woman. Besides, I'm immune to poison ivy." "Doesn't look like it," Judy scoffed. "I've always been immune. I've never once had it." "Just because it's never happened doesn't mean it can't happen, James," she said with her hands on her hips. "Has to be that little freak's fault. He's brewing some kind of chemical agent in that mad scientist lab of his. I could smell it in the air last night. I could even smell it all the way up on the second floor." A deflection and a half-truth. He remembered that chemical smell coming from the top of Samuel's back building. That must be what this rash came from. He had a lead. He just needed to prove it. You should go see a doctor, James, Judy said. James hated doctors. Their excessive education made them all condescending. School doesn't make you smart. You have to be born smart, like James. He didn't need some doctor telling him that it was poison ivy when that was impossible. It had to be a side effect of getting too close to Samuel's experiments. What he needed was information. When he needed to figure out something, he went to the library. That's what smart people did. I'm taking the car. You're just gonna have to get a ride for one of the little sluts you work with, James said as he jumped off the couch. Hang on, James, she called out as he ran upstairs to grab another pair of shoes. They were his nice shoes, but that didn't matter right now. He thundered back down the stairs and grabbed the car keys on his way out. Judy was trying to stop him. She said something about not having someone to ride with, but he didn't care. He started the 49 Studebaker up, but just as he was about to back out of the driveway, he saw Judy screaming at him in the rearview mirror. He chewed on his fingernail for a second and scratched the back of his neck with his other hand. Judy continued to try to get his attention. Holding the clutch and brake, he began to rev the engine. James, are you insane? Judy shrieked. James rolled down the window and screamed, Out of the way, Judy! Unless you want me to run you over! He smiled to himself. What would it be like to run someone over with a car? He mused. He revved the engine one more time and then popped the clutch, sending the massive Studebaker backwards. Judy yelled and jumped out of the way just in time. He was going so fast that he nearly lost control of the car when he turned the wheel to orient it to the road. He slammed it into first and flew down the quiet suburban lane. He spent all day at the library, grabbing book after book about rashes caused by chemicals. There were all kinds of suspects. Contact dermatitis is what he diagnosed himself with. Even bleach can cause it. Samuel was doing something dangerous, that was for sure. At the end of the day, James had books strewn across the table, showing burns and rashes with little black and white pictures. He looked back and forth between his arms and the various pictures in the books, trying to figure out exactly what chemical had burned him. Yet again, what he needed was proof. He grabbed the most promising medical book and walked briskly out of the library's front door. He didn't have a library card. Besides, he needed this book more than the library did. He drove down to the pharmacy to buy some calamine lotion and a pack of cigarettes. He didn't normally smoke. These were trying times. He'd earned a treat. When he got home, he almost went inside without noticing the work trucks outside the Victorian house. He stood there in his driveway and lit up a smoke while scratching the back of his arm. The workmen were up on ladders with special gloves, attaching rows of razor wire atop the already obscenely high fence. James continued to scratch his arm idly while he watched. To him, this was even more proof that Samuel was up to no good. He must have gotten close to something important last night. It had to be something damning enough for Samuel to spend more money instead of calling the police. James was more sure now than ever that Samuel was hiding something. It was now more important than ever to expose Samuel. It was personal before, but now it was more than personal. Samuel was actively harming people, harming him. This was about justice, not revenge. James was sure that if he exposed Samuel's secrets, then he'd be lauded as a hero. They'd even want to interview him for the paper. He just had to prove he was right. Then James would get what he deserved. And so would Samuel. He stood in front of the window all day, watching the workmen. He kept trying to find a way around the razor wire, but the workmen knew what they were doing. Hour after hour he watched, lighting up cigarette after cigarette and putting them out on the windowsill. He had made up his mind. He needed to get in there, no matter the cost. It would be a gamble, but James was sure that whatever he found would ultimately vindicate his actions in the end. At around 8 o'clock, something new happened. Samuel exited the Victorian house with a picnic basket in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. Where was he going? Samuel certainly couldn't have found himself a sweetheart. The man was too ugly for that. Must be some professor friend. James curled his lip in disgust. Then it hit him. It was Friday. Was this a pattern? Does he do this every Friday? Judy didn't come home that night. She had been gone when he came home from the library, and frankly, he couldn't give a damn. He giggled. He had his opening. He flew down the stairs and out the front door. This has to be a pattern. This has to be a pattern, he mumbled to himself. Bill sat in his lawn chair and typically pulled a Miller out of his blue ice chest for James. James didn't sit down. Bill, I need you to do me a favor, James said. What you need, friend? Bill said as he beamed. I need you to keep an eye out and let me know if you see that little freak coming back down the lane. Who's the freak? Bill asked in confusion. The new neighbor. I need you to play lookout, James hissed. Sometimes Bill's stupidity was more than he could stand. He imagined slamming a tire iron right across that dumb fat face of his. James, buddy, you can't just go breaking into someone's house. What if the cops show up? Then you get in your car, and if you see anything, honk the horn, James said impatiently. But the car's in the garage, Bill replied, and James's mind screamed. Then open up the garage and wait in the car, Bill. I don't know, James. Why are you doing all this? Oh, for Christ's sake, look at my arms. Look at my face, Bill. That little freak is poisoning the whole neighborhood. I have proof of it, but I left it in my bedroom. How could Bill not understand that the new neighbor was a wolf in sheep's clothing? What? Did Judy get sick too? He asked with genuine concern. Yes, Bill, she's very sick. I need your help. Did you try calling the cops? They just laughed at me. I need more proof. So if you could just get in that jalopy of yours and honk if you see that red Cadillac coming back down the road, that would be swell. That way, no one has to know I was in there. I don't know, James, Bill said, hesitating once more. Please, Bill, you need to trust me, James pleaded, but in his head he screamed, You asshole, just do what I say. Bill squinted up at James and shook his head. Fine, give me a second, he said reluctantly. Bill stood up and shuffled into his house. A minute or two later, he lifted up the garage door and James quickly ducked in. I still don't understand, Bill said. That was it. James could see red. He was shaking all over with rage. Oh, for Christ's sake! Just get in the car, you fat! James roared and then shoved Bill as hard as he could towards Bill's black Buick. Bill reached out and swung his arms, trying to grab something to break his fall. His head made a dull thud as it impacted the rear chrome bumper. What do I have to do for you to trust me, Bill? You, of all people, should believe me! Bill said nothing in reply. Come on, Billy, get up! James said, his anger starting to run thin as a worry began to bubble inside of him. Bill wouldn't be getting back up. Bill was dead. James watched in fascination as Bill's startled eyes stared blankly into eternity. A pool of black blood was growing on the cement floor, silent and dark. James looked around nervously. He couldn't tell if anyone was watching him. There was at least no one he could see. He grabbed the piece of rope that hung from Bill's garage door and pulled it closed. The light from the bulb above the Buick was dim, but James could see what his rage had wrought. Shit! James cried out. Stupid fuck! Can't you even take a fall properly? Of course you can't. You're fucking useless. I fell 3 stories last night and I'm fine. And you just fall over and die? James was trembling with rage, but also with an old familiar feeling. It was wrong and he liked it. Part of it felt like vomiting, like he did when he had taken a bat to the back of his father's head. But that old familiar feeling was washed over him and the trembling subsided. He felt vindicated. What a waste of time. All those days he spent humoring Bill's myopic conversation about sports or girls or the news. Well, it wasn't my fault, Bill. You were just stupid and clumsy. I hope they put that on your tombstone, he said. He bent over Bill and pressed his hand against his chest. There was no heartbeat. His chest didn't heave up and down. He was definitely dead. He grabbed Bill under the arms and started dragging him into the house. His shiny loafers slipped as he struggled with the dead weight that was Bill's fresh corpse. Even so, he felt stronger than he had in years. Little quiet giggles were escaping as he heaved Bill inside. Now, what to do with him? He couldn't have him stinking so bad that he could be smelled down from the road. Was he talking or thinking? Maybe he was doing both. James looked around Bill's house. Bill's massive Frigidaire beckoned. James dropped Bill, whose head hit the kitchen floor with a soft sound that reminded James of dropping a watermelon. He opened the fridge and started tossing its contents out, not caring what hit the floor. Glass shattered and leftovers splattered everywhere. After the food, he threw out the metal grill shells. Once empty, James took a step back and examined the void he created. That should do, he said as he scratched his reddening rashes. He bent over to lift Bill's lifeless body by his armpits, but when he did, his feet slipped on some slop. His leg shot out and James fell on his ass with Bill's body partially atop him. God damn it, Bill, he cursed. With frustrated anger, he slipped and slid as he frantically got to his feet. His elbow was bleeding. He'd cut himself on one of the many glass shards on the floor. "You motherfucker!" he cried out. He started to kick and stomp on Bill's chest. Each wet thump soothed his madness. After a few seconds, he was out of breath. "Screw this, and screw you, Bill," he said, shaking his head. "You know what? You got yourself into this mess, and you can get yourself back out. I'm done." James threw up his hands. His clothes and shoes were ruined. Blood and food were all over his body, even in his hair. He would have to burn these clothes. "What if Judy comes home?" he asked Bill. Yes. I'll just use your backyard for the fire, not mine." James went to Bill's front door and peered out the peephole. He couldn't see much. He creaked the door open and looked outside. The night's warmth pressed in through the crack, and there was not a soul to be seen. Just to be safe, James turned off Bill's porch light before venturing out. He walked casually across the street and up on his own porch. He took off his shoes before walking in. Couldn't have bloody footprints on the rug now, could he? He walked carefully upstairs, making sure he didn't smear anything on the walls. His bedroom door was still open. He opened his closet and pulled a large empty suitcase off the top shelf. He noticed that he had gotten blood on the closet door. He looked down at his filthy hands with detached wonder. Then he walked into the master bedroom and proceeded to wash his hands until he could at least use them without spreading evidence everywhere. He then went back down to the task at hand. He went through the room gathering a change of clothes, and then looking at the closet door, he smiled. "Bloody Bill," he said with a chuckle. He felt something akin to calm. There was always so much to get worked up over. James was almost always angry. This calm growing inside him was like a fresh breeze on a spring meadow. So, calmly, James went down to the kitchen and grabbed some towels and some Lysol. He made sure that both the closet and the front door were evidence-free. Then he took the towels and put them in a garbage bag. Next, he packed up his change of clothes and headed out the front door. Back at Bill's, he made his way to the master bedroom and stripped. He didn't care if he made a mess here. Bill had no family or friends other than James. He knew it would be at least a few days before anyone came looking for Bloody Bill. He showered and let the hot water run down his itchy, aching back. It was a tranquil experience. When he was done, he piled all of his clothes into the suitcase and headed out back. He piled everything he needed to burn together. He went back into Bill's garage to find something to help start a fire. Bill had a can of lawnmower gas. That would do nicely. As the flames burned the pile of evidence, he watched with fascination. The fire danced like some seductive fluid creature. He put his hand in the flame and felt it burning his rash. The pain felt safe and comforting. All of a sudden, he pulled his hand back. The pain changed. Suddenly, his whole body ached. He started to quake all over. No, stop, he cried. Come back! The old anxiety was flowing back in. It was like he had been a clean, empty vessel, and now he was filling back up with stinking bile. Bill, he whispered as tears ran down his cheeks. There were no tears for Bill. He wept for the peace he had felt fleetingly. He was losing it. He fell to his knees and tried to grasp that feeling once again. He closed his eyes and reached out into the darkness, trying to grasp it through sheer willpower alone. Alas, it was no good. His old friend Rage had returned. He opened his eyes and they were filled with a grim, deep determination. Samuel had to die. He knew it even before his lips formed the word. This was all his fault. If Samuel hadn't moved in next door, Bill would still be alive. Samuel had to die. The next morning, James's thoughts rung clear as he woke up. Samuel had to die. James didn't even eat breakfast. He had managed to sneak behind the Victorian house to retrieve his shoes after he had left Bill's. His itching was like a curse. He had covered himself in calamine lotion, but even with it dried and caked all over his body, he still couldn't stop scratching. Putting another cigarette butt out on the windowsill, he wondered where Judy was. He had met her when she was just 13. This was back when he still went to church. Back when he really believed that his soul could be saved by some old book written by forgotten fools. He had been a passionate Christian back then. He delved deep into the mysteries of the Bible every day. It was like God had chosen only him to speak to. The congregation loved him as he eloquently and fervently recounted scripture from memory. Back then, everybody had smiled when they saw him walk down the lane. He had come so far from being that terrified little child in Oklahoma, living with his drunk deadbeat dad. The Baptist Church in Garland, Texas, had welcomed him with open arms. He had noticed Judy the first day. She was so sensual in her pigtails, that little mischievous glint in her eye whenever he passed her in the church halls. 2 years later, after a long and secret courtship, they were married. It's amazing how time could sour a soul as sweet as hers into the cold bitch he knew today. There was a time where he would have kicked down every door in town to find her if she was even an hour late cooking dinner. He thought he had her trained. A woman should be meek before her husband. He truly believed this, and the Bible agreed. Now Judy was just a passing thought. She wasn't the woman he deserved after all. She was selfish and cruel. Since when had he done anything but take good care of her? He shook his head. Some people don't know the meaning of gratitude. Jesus had abandoned him too. The zeal he used to feel when quoting scripture or kneeling in prayer had slowly vanished. It became more and more difficult to remember the lines. His anger at God grew. He was forsaken, just like always. All his attempts at love had always led to betrayal of some form or another. Well, no more. Samuel had arrived home late the night before, his Cadillac back in place around 1:30 a.m. On Fridays, Samuel left his fortress to spend time with someone else. James was sure this would be a pattern. Damn liar, James muttered. He would have given Samuel all the warmth in the world. I have a lot of work today and every day, James said mockingly. Liar! James did have the time to spend with a friend. Jealousy flickered under James' heart like a green fire. His jaw felt stiff as he stared at the air conditioning units thrumming away atop the back building. Samuel would pay for his betrayal. He had a week to figure out the best way of doing it. It wouldn't be enough just to kill him. He had to expose him in front of everybody. If he could just get into that back building, he would finally know Samuel's sins. And when all of Samuel's plotting was laid bare, he could taste that calm again. He could feel weightless and free again. Then he could focus on bringing Judy back to heel. Until then, she was meaningless. The days passed uneventfully. Wake up, eat, shit, watch the little freak. On Thursday, he was standing at the window, and just as he was putting out another cigarette on the windowsill, Judy had come home. What the hell are you doing, James? She cried out. The whole place smells like smoke, and now I find you with butts all over the place. Oh, cry me a river, Judy, he chided, without even turning around. I'm gone for a few days, and everything turns into an ashtray? There are burn marks and butts all over the furniture. The Sears couch is ruined. The sink is full of wet ashes. And I find you in here chain-smoking by the damn window. She really knew how to get under his skin. He whirled around, and the look on his face made her go white. You ungrateful little bitch, he exploded. None of that matters. Since when have you been so obsessed with material things? Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to speak. Look at me! Look at me! Look what that little done to me! He threw his arms out. The rash had spread. It was all over him. There were bloody spots from his incessant itching. Every scratch was a crimson line across his skin. Jesus Christ, James, you need to see a doctor, she said. It seemed like she was genuinely concerned, but James knew better. That's all his fault, he yelled, pointing to the window. If you had been home and even the least bit helpful, you'd know this. He's pumping chemicals into the air. He's killing me. James, she trailed off, her eyes tearing up. What, Judy, what? Do you want to say something? Go on, tell me I'm crazy. Tell me I'm stupid. Judy didn't say anything. She just ran out the bedroom door crying. James pursued her out and down the stairs. Oh, that's just great. Blame me. Act like I'm the villain. I saved you from that household of hate. I thought you were like me. I thought you were worth saving. I should have left you at the mercy of your father's wandering hands. She spun around at the front door and raised her hand as if to strike him. The hate in her eyes was palpable. Her lower jaw trembled. So now you're going to strike me? Well, go on, Judy. Go on! He yelled and punctuated his rage by punching the door right beside her head with everything he had. Judy shook her head and flew out the door. Oh, that's just poetry, Judy. Scripture from on high! Abandon me like Judas. Spit on me like everyone else. Soon everyone will regret underestimating me. Soon I'm going to be the hero, he bellowed as he followed her to the sidewalk. She ran down the lane into a green Buick and jumped into the passenger seat. Whore! He screamed. He turned around and stopped for a second. Samuel was standing on his porch with his hands in his pockets. James was already shaking with rage. "Go back inside! You'll get yours soon enough," he blurted out. Samuel didn't even look surprised. He just quietly slipped back in his own front door. "That's right, coward, turn your back so I can stab it," he whispered with a little chuckle. He calmly walked back into the house and up the stairs. Looking out the bedroom windows, he lit another cigarette and watched as Samuel went into his back building again like nothing had happened. James knew how he would get in the front door. He had a huge red crowbar that would rip the house's door right off the hinge. The problem was the door to the back building. It was steel and stoutly designed. He had toyed with the idea of using his car to pull off the door, but couldn't figure out how to attach the chains after opening the gate. He needed a welder, something to melt right through the door. He knew where to get one, but it was going to be tricky. McMiller's auto shop had a powerful acetylene welder. He needed to act tonight. Tomorrow, Samuel would go out again, and then he would get his chance. He sat in his Studebaker across the street from Miss Miller's auto shop. The neon green sign was just flickering on, and James chewed his fingernails and scratched his rash. He took the cigarette out of his mouth and extinguished it on the dashboard. The ashtray was brimming with butts, and his fingers had turned brown with nicotine stains. His index finger was black from putting out butts on whatever was most convenient. Mr. McMiller is nothing if not predictable. At 7:30 on the dot, he always got into his Ford pickup truck and headed home for the day. It had been the same every day James had worked there. Even almost a year later, he would still be in the same stupid, predictable routine. James didn't even give it a second thought that McMiller would do anything but the obvious. So, as he reckoned it, by 8:30, he should be aces. He watched anxiously at the hands on the Studebaker's clock approached 8:30. He was anxious but not worried. He gripped the crowbar so tightly his knuckles turned white. Maybe he'd use the crowbar on Samuel, drop it right on top of his head, crack his head open like a melon. "No, he needs to suffer," James whispered. He had thought of thousands of ways to kill Samuel so far, but nothing seemed perfect. Nothing felt poetic. The punishment had to fit the crime. James was sure that in the moment he would know. He had to make Samuel understand. Make sure that he knew that he would die because he deserved it. James wanted to rip out his own tortured heart and shove it down Samuel's throat. James wanted Samuel to know how much it hurt. "Shit!" he hissed. It was 8:45. He'd been daydreaming. He popped out of his car and briskly walked across the street. He approached the garage door and turned around. Look around, he waited until he could hear or see no car. Then he slipped the long red crowbar out of his sleeve and jammed it into the doorframe. One mighty push and the door splintered. James hungrily opened the door and turned on his flashlight. He knew this garage like the back of his hand. For 2 years he had worked in the stifling shop, laying on his back in the heat covered in grease and filth while McMiller paid him peanuts. As he walked by the main office, he remembered that superior look on that man's face as he had lectured James about taking responsibility for his actions. Told him that he needed to talk to someone about his anger issues. It wasn't James's fault that the customer had tried to leave without paying. He fixed the damn car. It was impossible that he missed something as simple as a belt. The customer needed to be taught a lesson. He knew in his heart that McMiller was just waiting for a real excuse to fire him all along. He was intimidated by James' intelligence and resourcefulness. There was never anything wrong with his work, so he had to invent reasons to yell at James. His flashlight glanced over the acetylene tanks and the welding gear. They were sitting on a dolly, like always. As he leaned it back to roll the tanks out of his car, he dropped his crowbar on the floor with a cacophonous ringing. "What the hell?" exclaimed a voice from the main office. The light in the office switched on. It was McMiller. "That's impossible," James whispered in disbelief. There he was in the flesh, from his sagging belt line to his gray, bearded, grease-stained face. McMiller looked at him in disbelief. "James, what the bloody hell are you doing in here?" James couldn't say a word. Ice water ran down his back and his mind flashed back to his father. "This is for your own good," his father barked in his mind's eye. "Did you break in?" McMiller said with his father's eyes. "Say something, James." I need this," James said meekly. "The welder? What the hell for? You can't just come in here and take whatever you please. This is just like you, boy. You never were good at thinking before you act. Go on, put it down and get out of here before one of us has to do something we'll regret." There was a moment of awkward silence. "You weren't supposed to be here," James said, with his hands beginning to shake. "Oh, so you were just going to rob me blind without even a hello? You really are a piece of work, James." James was starting to feel his face flush. His anger was pushing away the embarrassment he felt. Mr. McMiller shook his head. "Fine, boy. You leave me no choice. You stay right there while I call the police. You can run if you want, but I know where you live." McMiller turned around and waddled towards his office. "No," whispered James as he picked the crowbar off the floor. He took a few purposeful steps towards McMiller. "You won't get in my way!" he screamed and sprinted across the garage. He was on top of Miller before he could even turn around. He brought the crowbar down just as he had imagined doing to Samuel. McMiller's back jerked and he stood up extra straight before falling backwards. James deftly jumped out of the way as McMiller fell like a mighty oak. When he hit the ground, the right side of his body started shaking and spasming out of control. He looked like he was being electrocuted. James smiled and looked down at the quivering pile of flesh. The white-hot joy ran through him as he realized McMiller was still alive. McMiller's eyes looked wildly around the room. It focused on nothing, but he was still breathing. James raised the crowbar up over his head as he saw his father's lifeless body in his mind. James let out a primal scream as he brought the crowbar down again and again until Mr. McMiller moved no more. There was nothing left of his face or head. Everything above his shoulders was just a mass of blood and torn skin. James fell to his knees in ecstasy. He dropped the crowbar on the floor and ran his blood-soaked hands down his face, weeping with joy. He embraced himself, quickening all over. This was it. This is what he should feel all the time. The joy, the love, the passion, everything all at once. He curled his lip up and spit into the cavity that was once McMiller's face. James pulled back into his driveway silently as he floated on a cloud of peace and satisfaction. He had washed himself completely from head to toe in the shop sink at the garage. He had put a change of clothes in the back of his Studebaker just in case. He gathered the trash bags his clothes and towels were in. He turned to the east. He could see the orange glow of fire in the distance on the moonless night. It would take the police quite some time to make sense of the crime scene after the fire got put out. Before he left, he had spilled everything flammable he could find. He stuffed a rag into a Coke bottle full of gasoline and threw the Molotov cocktail through the glass garage door window. He was running before it hit the ground, only hearing the glass tinkle as he opened the car door. He paused for a brief moment before starting the car. Part of him wanted to stay, wanted to watch it burn to the ground, but that would be stupid, and James wouldn't give the coppers the chance to accuse him of that. He headed across the street and pushed through Bill's wooden gate into the backyard. There he lit a fire that he could watch burn. He could hear sirens in the distance as his bloody clothes crackled merrily. For some reason, he thought of that one perfect Christmas that he had as a boy, the one where his father was away on business and it had only been him and his mother. This was before she had run out and left him to the cruel devices of his father. One more night, then he would be free. He turned his back on the fire and headed home. The next morning, his alarm went off, but he was already staring at the ceiling. He was depressed. Just as he had been blissfully dozing off, panic had gripped him. What if someone had seen him? What if someone knew about Bill? He had started to go over every detail of the murders in his mind, trying to figure out if there was any angle he'd miss, something to tie him directly to Mr. McMiller. There might be fingerprints at Bill's house, but burning down Bill's house would be too suspicious. He had to be smart. He had gotten up in the night and drove to an all-night grocery store where he purchased 20 gallons of Clorox bleach. He then covered everything he could find in Bloody Bill's house that he had come in contact with. Any remaining evidence could be explained away by all the time he had spent at Bill's house before Bill had had his little accident. Besides, the stupid cops would never suspect him. He was 2 steps ahead of them, he had told himself. At least he had tried to tell himself. The overwhelming dread filled him all the way until dawn. He reached over to Judy's side of the bed and turned off the alarm. After coffee and a bowl of cereal with dubious-smelling milk, he took up his post at the bedroom window. The dread was subsiding as he stared at the Victorian house. Then, something unexpected happened. A black Chevrolet rolled up to Samuel's house, parking behind the Cadillac. 2 men in black suits got out of the car and strolled up to the door. James raced downstairs to get a better look. There was a window in the kitchen where he could see the porch perfectly. He didn't favor that window often, but what it lacked in perspective, it made up for with proximity. As one of the men raised his arm and knocked on Samuel's door, he caught a glimpse of a badge under his belt and a gun under his blazer in the shoulder holster. Were they police? And why were they knocking on Samuel's door? For a moment he thought his heart would stop. Had they finally figured it out? Were they here to stop Samuel? No, Samuel was his. This was to be his triumph. The door opened almost immediately, as if Samuel had been expecting them. They exchanged smiles and shook hands before going inside. James ran as fast as he could upstairs. Looking out of the bedroom window, he couldn't see inside the house, but if Samuel was going down, they would have to go in the back building. James paced back and forth in front of the window, biting his fingernails. He itched and scratched all over. Something was wrong. This wasn't supposed to happen. He thought of the crowbar he still had in his trunk. Should he just bust open Samuel's door and take his chances? No. Calm down, James, he muttered with a finger in his mouth. Minutes turned into hours, and then finally the front door opened. James almost fell down the stairs as he rushed to the kitchen window. The two men exited the Victorian house, holding large cardboard filing boxes. Samuel followed, carrying a box himself. They put the boxes inside the back of the Chevrolet. He wished he could hear what they were saying. Samuel held up his finger to say wait. He ran back inside and reappeared carrying a large manila folder full of papers. He handed the papers to the two beaming agents. They again shook his hands and parted ways. The two men got back in their car and drove away. James's head was spinning. What the hell had he just witnessed? Was Samuel being protected? Was he in league with the cops or the feds? This new angle caused James to question everything. Why would law enforcement be allowing him to do as he pleased? Maybe he was doing illegal experiments for the government, and therefore he was allowed to act with impunity. Maybe Samuel was a fed himself. James was running out of fingernails to chew on, so he lit another cigarette as he went back upstairs. Staring out the window, he watched Samuel head back into his work building. More secrets, more questions, more anger. James had no answers at all. He was driving him mad, and he didn't care. He had to know everything now. It wasn't good enough to just kill Samuel. He had to wring all the answers out of him. Feds or no feds. He wasn't an expert on torture, but he was sure he could think of something. It was about time for him to start preparing. There was plenty of light in the sky, but he had to take stock of what he had on hand. He wished he had a gun, but Judy had sold all his guns last year because he held her at gunpoint one night after smelling another man's cologne on her. The next day he came home to find all his guns gone. That bitch really had some nerve sometimes. He had lost his job the next day, so buying back his guns was impossible. The money was gone too. Judy had used it to catch up on the bills. James went through the kitchen, deciding on one large kitchen knife and one small one, good for cutting rope or other small things. He wrapped them in towels and placed them in another suitcase he'd found in the closet. He made sure he had 2 changes of clothes, just to be safe. He went into the garage and grabbed a pair of wire snips big enough to cut off fingers or any other digits. A big roll of duct tape and several lengths of hemp rope were necessities. He stuffed everything into the suitcase and made sure he could carry the luggage with one hand so he could keep the other free to use the crowbar. Once his kit was ready, he returned to his observation post to wait. He was getting excited. Every minute he grew closer and closer to the culmination of all he desired. Samuel would be gone and he'd have all his answers. But what of afterwards? He was done playing house with Judy. There was still a chance that they would tie Bill's murder to him, not to mention there would be a lot of heat if 2 of his neighbors disappeared. James wasn't stupid. He knew they would look hard at him for everything. Even if he did prove that Samuel was dangerous, they might just decide to screw him over instead of recognizing the immense service he provided by exposing Samuel's secrets. The answer was simple: Mexico. He had never been to Mexico and hated Specs on general principle. The sound of Spanish made his skin crawl, but he was sure that learning it would be an easy feat for him. How hard could it be to learn a lesser language than English, he thought to himself. The idea of running hadn't even occurred to him until now. It was the feds that made him think that Samuel's death might make him a patsy for whatever Samuel had been up to. Yes, he was sure now that they had to be feds. Who else would have the lack of scruples necessary to allow Samuel to continue with his experiments? When everything was exposed, they would most likely try to shift the blame to him somehow. The CIA might even be involved. These thoughts fired into his mind like bullets, but it didn't change what he had to do. It didn't change what would happen. He just needed to be prepared to run afterwards. Then there would be nothing standing in the way of the truth. Once Samuel disappeared, they would have no choice but to turn his property upside down. Everything would come out. It had to. He needed it too. Maybe he could start another fire, get the local police and fire department to jump on the scene before the feds came in to cover it all up. That was the only problem left. How to ensure that everybody knew. Maybe he could get away with only burning the house down. He could make sure all the evidence was in the back building. He could even call the fire department to make sure they put out the fire in time. James went back out to the garage and found the old bottle of kerosene he kept around. He placed it in the trunk of his car beside the acetylene tanks. If push came to shove, he could even throw the acetylene into the fire. That was sure to make a dramatic diversion as he sped out of town. His best bet would be to drive across the field on the other side of Samuel's house as a shortcut to the main road that would lead him out of town. He sat on the couch and went through his kit one more time. It was 7 o'clock. Soon Samuel would be off to do whatever it is he did every Friday. James was sure that this was a pattern. He held the butcher knife in his hand firmly and imagined how it would feel to slice into Samuel's flesh with it. It was then the front door opened. Judy stood in the doorway with a confused look on her face. She looked at him, looked at the knife. His kit was laid out on the coffee table like an open book. She closed the door behind her. She didn't say anything, but the fear in her eyes was growing. Before James could do anything, she pulled a pistol out of her handbag and pointed it at him. "It's not what it looks like, baby," he said coolly as he could. "James, I don't care what you do anymore." "I'm leaving," she said, with the pistol shaking in her hands. The statement took a second to reach James, but when it did, he could feel his blood boil. "You're going to leave me?" he said, pointing the knife at himself. "You don't have the stones." "I mean it," she said with a quivering voice. "I came here to deliver divorce papers." James stood up. "You're no one without me." "Stay back," she warned. James put down the knife slowly and began carefully walking towards her. "You know I can't let you leave." His voice was calm, but he was not. If anyone was to do the leaving, it would be him. That would serve her right. Leave her behind to answer all the questions the police asked. Maybe they would throw her in jail just for being too close to the events that were about to transpire. Judy reached into her purse without taking the gun or her eyes off of James. She threw down a folder full of documents on the floor. "You will never hurt me again," she said with her eyes filled with water. "And where do you think you'll go?" he said, slowly closing the distance. "The same place I was earlier. The same place I've been spending all my time," she said. James's eyes narrowed as he felt his jaw stiffen. "What's his name?" he almost growled. "There is no name. I've been spending all of my time at church. I've rented a room with the pastor's family." "Liar!" he shouted. She had to be lying, the little slut. There had to be another man. "You can ask the pastor yourself. Don't try and stop me." He couldn't hold in his rage any longer. Without thinking, he lunged for the gun and slapped it out of her hand. She cried out in surprise, but it was too late. His hands were around her neck. She crumpled as he forced her to the ground. "You think you can leave me? You belong to me. You always have, you little slut." Judy squirmed and clawed at his face, but he only saw the red of his rage. He could feel something break in her, but he kept squeezing anyway. She made choking and gurgling noises as she frantically tried to free herself. "After all I've given you, a house of your own, a car of your own, a life of your own, I'll kill you before I let you go. Do you hear me? I said, do you hear me?" Judy's body was limp on the floor. She hadn't heard him, and she never would. James let out a roar and squeezed with everything he had. Only when his hands started to shake and slip did he finally let go. He closed his eyes as he kneeled over her lifeless body and waited for the rush he had come to expect from a kill. But after a few minutes, it didn't come. Instead, he felt something else, something unexpected. His chin started to quiver and there was a lump in his throat. He didn't want this feeling. He tried to focus on the moment. He looked down at her still body and started to cry. Her beautiful face was twisted and almost unrecognizable. There was a purple ring around her neck from his hands. In that moment, he knew that he was truly alone. He imagined staring out across a vast, empty desert, standing by himself in an endless emptiness. She was gone, the perfect little wife. He tried to remember how she mocked him, how she baited him. He clenched his fist and tried to feel the anger she always caused in him. but he knew that anger was gone. She would never get under his skin again. She would never hold him again, and he would never have the joy of arguing with her again. In that moment, he realized how much he loved her. He touched her soft cheek gently with the back of his hand. He couldn't remember the last time he felt such tenderness for another human being. She was dead, and he was alone. He was devastated. It was worse than her leaving him for another man. He could have always won her back, but now that would never happen. It wasn't his fault. That single thought rang out like a bell in his mind. It wasn't his fault. She was dead, and it wasn't his fault. Like a dam breaking, the rage exploded in his heart. That freak! He screamed from the bottom of his soul. The day the for sale sign had been removed from the Victorian house was when it all started to go so wrong. He had never felt so rebuked as he did when that little four-eyed freak spat in his face. Everything that had happened up to this point was Samuel's fault. James walked up to the bedroom closet and grabbed a single white sheet. He went back downstairs and saw the gun across the room where it had landed. James picked it up and then turned his attention to Judy. He looked down at her lifeless body again and felt such acute loneliness that it threatened to pull him back down. He needed to be strong now. He gently covered the body with the sheet. "I'll avenge you, baby doll," he said to her with reverence. He didn't have much time left. Samuel would be leaving any time now. James packed up his murder kit and placed it by the door. He had only one plan left. Expose Samuel, murder Samuel, set the fire, and disappear to Mexico. He set the murder kit by the front door and walked out back. James paced back and forth nervously. He chewed on his fingernail and mumbled to himself. "Not my fault. Not my fault," he repeated to himself. The night was clear and hot. The humid air made James's skin feel greasy. He was already sweating from everything before. Waiting for his neighbor to drive off in his Cadillac was almost too much for him. James paced back and forth in his backyard, getting ready to prove everything. The air was pregnant and bloated. It really needed to shit out a storm. Then the air would be lighter. Then he wouldn't have to sweat so hard. He reached into his pocket for his cigarettes. "Just one more smoke, and then I'll go," he mumbled to himself. He had to prove it. No one believed him, but that freak was evil. Whatever he got up to behind closed doors was sick. He could feel it in his bones. He would finally know. He would finally have proof, and he would finally have his answers. As he lit the cigarette, he heard the front door of the Victorian house open and shut. Then he heard the car door open and shut as well. James raced inside and up to his front door. Peering through the peephole, he waited with anticipation for the Cadillac to roll by. When it did, he looked down at his watch. It was 8:14. He needed to make sure Samuel didn't come back immediately for some reason. He held the gun Judy had pulled on him. It was heavy like a hammer in his hand. It gave him an electric feeling holding the cold lump of metal. He slipped it in his pocket. "Thanks, Judy. Now I can't lose," he said, looking at the sheet. He watched the minutes tick by. When it read 8:30, he picked up his kit and went out to his car. The drive was short, of course. He pulled his car around the far side of Samuel's house. He didn't want it to be spotted by any looky-loos. James got out of the car and slipped around to the far side of the porch. He checked to see that the coast was clear. He slipped back into the car and grabbed the acetylene tanks and fastened them to the dolly. He wheeled them around to the part of the high fence that swung inward like a gate and rested the tanks there. No one would look twice at that. Samuel's industrial-looking complex would make a few gas tanks look natural. He hurried back to the car and retrieved his kit and crowbar. He stopped at the threshold. His heart was in his throat. He was beginning to understand the thrill of a hunt. He was enjoying the adrenaline, the nervousness, the excitement of doing dangerous things in the pursuit of goodness. He slammed the crowbar into the old wooden door. He wrenched it with his full body weight, but the door barely budged. James looked closely at the door. It had 3 deadbolts, just like the back building. He repositioned the crowbar in between 2 of them and tried again. This time the door gave, just a little bit. He pulled back and forth on it, wiggling it more and more, and the door creaked and groaned in protest. The first deadbolt made a pop, and then the second. The third deadbolt made a scraping sound and gave way as well. He was in. He chuckled to himself and pushed the door open with his shoulder. James stood in the doorway with a smug sense of satisfaction. He would have to make a quick look around the house. There was no telling what secrets lay inside the house as well as the mysterious workshop. He reached in his suitcase and pulled out a flashlight. James flicked a switch, and a dim yellow beam illuminated the front room to his left. Something wasn't right. Boxes laid around the room, stacked neatly in little towers. The couch was covered in a sheet, and there was dust on the coffee table. James shone the light into the dining room. More boxes stacked everywhere. There was no dining room table, no china cabinet, and no bulbs in the chandelier. He made his way to the kitchen. It was the same. There were boxes labeled, dishes stacked on the floor. Only one was open that had a few pieces missing. He opened the fridge, and it was almost empty. James shook his head. It was like Samuel had started unpacking but stopped for some reason. He went back out and headed to the back room, and it was the same. Boxes stacked high. James scratched his arm, waving the light around wildly. This was all wrong. Would he have to look through all these boxes? Where were the secrets? He practically ran up the staircase to the next floor. There were 3 rooms and a bathroom. The bathroom was completely empty. No signs of life and dust on everything. James looked down and saw that his shoe print was the only one on the dusty floor. He moved to the first room. There were 2 small beds, but nothing to adorn them. No boxes in this room, and the next was even emptier. He finally made it to the master bedroom. Here there were signs of life. There was a thin wool blanket and a single pillow on the bed, but no sheet. On the floor there was a small pile of clothes beside a box with more clothes in it. That was all. The master bedroom only had a tiny bar of soap, and a lonely toothbrush sat by the sink. Oh, Samuel, why would someone this lonely ignore an outstretched hand like mine? James asked in amazement. He walked over to the window and opened the blinds. The brightly illuminated back building beckoned to him. Everything has to be in there. James went back down to the stairs and walked out the back door. He walked up to the steel door of the back building and knocked on it with a crowbar. The dull thump of steel answered. He ran his hand along the seam. There was almost no room to fit a crowbar in. He had been right, like always. He would have to cut it open. He turned to the gate and examined it. A massive heavy-duty padlock hung from it. James felt it in his hand. The furniture it was affixed to was of similar heaviness. James cursed under his breath. Even if he had brought a bolt cutter, it wouldn't be able to deal with this lock. James chewed his finger and thought. Frantic feeling was growing inside him. He was missing something important. His plan needed revising. The tanks would have to come through the house. Something was nagging at him. His mind was racing too fast for him to put his finger on it. James marched through the house and out the front door. He had just reached the dolly when he noticed there were headlights coming down the road. He froze. The lights got closer and closer. In a moment, they would be in front of his other neighbor's house. Was Samuel coming home already? He looked at his watch. It had only been 15 minutes. He was supposed to be gone for hours. James bolted back inside the house. This wasn't right. He needed more time. Samuel! You're ruining everything! Frank spit as he ripped open his kit. He grabbed the duct tape and rope and shoved them down the front of his pants. He switched off the flashlight and took the safety off the gun and peered out the front window. The red Cadillac rolled up to the curb and Samuel stepped out. He was wearing a black suit and tie. James could see the glint of his shoes, freshly shined. He walked calmly up the sidewalk, only stopping briefly to consider the acetylene tanks. James held his breath as Samuel stood in the doorway. He raised the gun over his head, ready to bring it down on Samuel's. James was going to be careful this time. He didn't want to kill Samuel outright, just stun him. He needed answers, and only when he was satisfied with those would he kill Samuel. Why wasn't Samuel stepping over the threshold? James's hand shook. The anticipation was almost too much for him to bear. Then Samuel said something odd. I'm sorry, old friend. I don't think you'll make it here in time. Goodbye, Samuel said. He seemed sad, but James could only feel his own frustration. Not knowing how to respond, he stayed frozen, ready to strike. I know you're in there, James, said Samuel to James' surprise. James stayed frozen in bewilderment. I know you've come here to kill me, James. I won't fight you. I've accepted my fate. James stepped out of the shadows in disbelief. He pointed the gun at Samuel. Samuel just stood there looking at James in the gloom with his hands in his pockets. Don't try anything funny, James warned. I assure you that won't be necessary. You probably won't understand, but I was born with a gift. Where I came from, it was called The golden gift, he said frankly. The hell are you talking about, you little freak? Are you trying to stall? No, James. I simply want you to know you have a choice. You see, my gift does two things. The one important thing to this moment is that I've always been able to sense when someone close to me is going to die. Imagine my surprise when the night you tried to climb my fence, I sensed my own death. Finally, after all this time, it was my turn. James was perplexed. Sense death? What kind of mumbo-jumbo was that? Shut up! I'm here for answers! What do you do in your mad scientist lab back there? What secrets are you hiding? If you tell me I won't have to torture you, he said with a smile, well, I might not torture you. Samuel shook his head. Very well, he replied. He stepped through the door's threshold and began to walk through the house. What's with the boxes, milquetoast? Too lazy to unpack? James chided. There was no point. I was going to move my family in so I could work alongside with them. But once I knew I was going to die, I had them stay at a hotel, and I sent all their belongings to storage. My two little girls, of course, didn't want to believe me. If they grew up without a father, that's on you, James, Samuel said calmly. No, it's your fault, Samuel. You've destroyed my whole life. Keep walking or I'll put a slug in your belly. This wasn't what James wanted. He wanted a fight. Samuel's calm demeanor was like a nail being driven between his eyes. Tell yourself what you like, but you have a choice. I've come too far for that. I've sacrificed everything to expose your foul deeds, James said as he prodded Samuel in the back of the head with the muzzle of the pistol. Samuel continued his bizarre explanation. My wife understood. She's known me long enough to see my gift firsthand. She's back in Dallas. She wanted to come with me, but that would have been too dangerous. That's because I am dangerous. You have no idea of what you've put me through. No idea of what I'm capable of. Precisely, Samuel said as he opened the back door and walked out towards the building behind the house. James's eyes widened with anticipation. Open the door and show me inside. Samuel pulled his hands out of his pockets, producing a key ring that jingled as he selected the right key. They walked up to the back building and Samuel patiently unlocked it. Don't make any sudden moves, James whispered. They walked through the door together. Samuel flicked on the light switch and the entire building was illuminated. James looked around with excitement. All the secrets laid bare, he thought to himself. As he looked around, he began to get even more confused. There were tables with scientific equipment on them, but aside from a microscope and a few odds and ends, there wasn't much to see. He looked at the walls. They were covered with empty cabinets and shelves. There was a lot of glassware, but it was all empty, shiny, and clean, just like everything his greedy eyes fell upon. What is this? Where are your experiments? Where are your samples? Where's the Frankenstein shit? James said as he almost forgot about Samuel. He walked around the laboratory frantically as he began to search every nook and cranny. He noticed a refrigerator and opened it, but it was empty. There was nothing to find. The entire place had been scrubbed down. There's nothing here. It's all empty, he exclaimed as he rounded on Samuel, pointing the pistol at him again. Where did you put it all? Where's my proof? Where are my answers? You four-eyed little shit, what have you done? James was starting to panic. Was he too late? Had Samuel covered his tracks? No, there had to be something. Samuel walked up to the microscope and looked at it like a friend. I destroyed anything that could link me to my family in the incinerator over there. I can't have you finding them, he said, gesturing to a large metallic box with a pipe that rose up to the ceiling. That included any biological or trace evidence. I had to be sure that I was your only victim. And before you think about using the incinerator to cover up your crimes, know that I had my gas shut off yesterday. No! James cried. I'll happily tell you about my work, even if you won't understand it, Samuel said, staring at the microscope. Understand it? You little I ain't stupid. I'm the smartest person I've ever met. You would do well to remember that. Call me stupid again and I'll make your death take hours, not minutes. Very well, said Samuel. I mentioned my gift. Well, another part of that gift allows me to identify the first step in a chain of discoveries that have the potential to change the world. I know that sounds arrogant, but I assure you, I can only see the first discovery and understand what path that discovery will lead to. I've never been able to see every step in the chain. Lies! You're not gifted! You'll never change the world. The world is better off without freaks like you. James was so angry it made his head pound. He wanted to tear Samuel apart with his bare hands, but he needed answers. His finger on the trigger of the gun began trembling. Samuel turned around and looked at James in the eyes. I fortified this place once I knew of my impending death. I only wished to postpone the inevitable long enough to finish my final work. I sold everything I discovered here, both the research laboratories and also to the FBI. My name will not go down in history, nor will it be part of history. I sold it all to assure myself that my family will live a comfortable life. James still felt like he was missing something important. Gifts? Samuel spoke like he was something special. He wasn't special. He was dirt. Worse than dirt, he was shit. The kind of shit you scraped off your boot. You haven't said anything yet. Tell me what you were doing here. I'm losing my patience. I proved that within DNA is a pattern that only exists in creatures capable of self-awareness. Something that allows us to transcend death. It's a simple sequence, but it will take centuries before it's finally decoded. It's only the first step to understanding reincarnation. I sold it as a way to help identify criminality for the FBI. They're desperate to learn how to test for criminality, but my research can't help with that. I sold the rest as simple DNA research. Those who will profit from my research have no idea what it will lead to. What are you talking about? James' head pounded. You're speaking nonsense. Enough with your lies. I want answers, and I want my proof. James growled as he gestured wildly with the pistol. Even if you had everything, it would have done you no good. I've done nothing illegal, and not even the scientist I sold my data to can understand the implications of it, said Samuel calmly. No! He roared. James snapped. He swung the pistol at the glassware on the tables. He picked up the microscope beside Samuel and threw it on the ground. Shards of glass went everywhere. He ran up to the shelves and started to sweep everything onto the floor with desperate swings of his arms. This can't be the end. This can't be what he sacrificed everything for. He was going to be a hero. He was going to be a legend. He was going to get everything he deserved and more. The laboratory was ruined, and so was James. He stood panting and sweating. There were cuts all over his hands and his arms. Samuel just stood in the center of it all, like the calm in the eye of a storm. You still have a choice, James. Choice? James seethed and gritted his teeth. Why would I choose anything but your death? Because I've been wrong about the death I've seen twice before. Both times there was a dark individual involved. He has the power to change things that are unchangeable. And if you spare me, I've convinced him to spare you from his wrath. You may be reborn someday and have a chance at a happy life. More lies and nonsense. You're just trying to wriggle out of the noose. I've accepted my death, but he hasn't. And if he comes here and finds me dead, well, let's just say there are things much worse than death. James turned on Samuel again. You have the balls to try and threaten me? I own you now. Your life belongs to me. It's what I deserve. It's what you owe me. Samuel looked at James with nothing but empathy. Don't you dare look down on me, James said. He was shaking with rage from head to toe. He needed to kill Samuel. He had to kill Samuel. It was all he wanted in this world now. Samuel understood. Very well, said Samuel. Follow me and I'll show you where I saw my death. Samuel put his hands back in his pockets and strolled out the door. James followed, not knowing up from down anymore. Samuel seemed to be leading him with puppet strings. James didn't want to admit it, but he was beginning to feel like Samuel was the one in control here, not him. He hated Samuel even more for this disgusting feeling. They walked across the way and back into the Victorian house. They passed through it and outside again. Samuel was leading and James was following, with his hands limply at his sides. He was crestfallen, but the blood in his veins silently boiled still. Samuel walked around the corner to the back of James Studebaker. He stood by the open trunk and looked across the miles and miles of empty acreage to the east. He's almost here, James. When he finds you, he will show you no mercy, Samuel said. Why would I be afraid of one of your little milquetoast friends? I'll be on my way to Mexico as soon as your body hits the ground. No one is going to find me. I'm too smart to get caught, James said with a sneer and raised the pistol. No one can hide from the dark man, Samuel said. James turned and looked at Samuel. He was a short man. James towered over him, yet this unnerving calm Samuel carried made James feel small and weak. He wished he could break that calm, but it was taking every ounce of strength James had not to turn and run. Was he scared? That was impossible. It was Samuel that should be afraid, not him. No one would find him in Mexico. Maybe he'd go all the way south to Brazil. Any last words? James said, anxious to step off the precipice. Thank you, old friend, Samuel said and closed his eyes. I ain't your friend. I'm your executioner, Stan. I wasn't talking to you, James. The hate flowed in his veins like thick honey. This was it. This was the moment. He pulled the trigger without even thinking. He didn't even hear the gunshot. Samuel's body fell like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He slouched backwards and landed in James's trunk like he had always intended to sit there. James felt joy begin to bubble up inside him. It was coming. Samuel was dead, and now he was free. He no longer cared about the mysteries that he had been obsessing over for so long. There was the answer to all his questions, dripping thick blood into his open trunk. Death was the only answer he needed. James took a long, slow, deep breath. It was over. He had his revenge. Whatever happened next was meant to be. As he stood there with his head tilted back staring at the stars, he picked up a sound in the distance. He was so lost in his post-murder trance that he almost didn't notice it at first, but it grew louder and louder, becoming undeniable. Sirens. James furrowed his brow in confusion. He turned his back on Samuel and came out from behind the Victorian house. His eyes grew wide and his jaw dropped. He could see police lights coming down the lane. Were they here for him? No, not now. Not when everything was finally right with the world. He sprinted back to the car and clumsily shoved Samuel's small frame into his trunk. He slammed the door repeatedly until it latched. He turned the wheel all the way to the right and punched the pedal to the floor. The car roared to life and kicked its rear end out on the dirt surface where it had been parked. He snapped the wheel back and countersteered, causing the back end to get back in line. The straight six punched him off into the night. He sped over the bumpy, unpaved meadow. Grass flicked against the front bumper. He hadn't even turned his lights on. There was nothing but grass for miles, and he didn't want the police to see his tail lights. Suddenly, he bottomed out hard. The Studebaker dropped, and then the front end popped back up. James almost slammed his head into the steering wheel. James flicked on the lights. He already had a head start. There would be no catching him now. He looked in his rearview mirror and could only barely see the police lights in the distance behind him. He had escaped. A sense of satisfaction in him grew as he smiled at his own fortune. He slowed his speed, and the meadow's bumps became less severe. Out of nowhere, he flew by a figure standing in the field. He only just saw him for a second. He looked over his shoulder in bewilderment. What the hell? When he turned back to the path in front of him, he gasped and slammed on his brakes out of pure instinct. The car slid and shimmied, but the man standing in front of him seemed to stay the same distance from his bumper, even though he slid for a good 50 feet. James stared at disbelief. In front of the headlights stood a smartly dressed man in a brown suit. He held a silver-handled cane in front of him, resting both his hands on its end. He was a balding man with brown hair. He stood like a sentinel in the middle of nowhere. It was like this field was where he had always stood. He wasn't extraordinary looking in any way. His height and looks were average, his stance was neutral, and his build was neither muscular nor prompt. It was his eyes that were different. They were brown and ordinary, except they seemed to glow slightly. They were filled with a silent fury that made James's blood run cold. They were locked on him, and he felt like they saw straight through to his core. James felt naked and exposed. He shook his head and rubbed his eyes quickly. He wasn't about to be stopped by some gentleman on a nature walk. He cranked down his window as fast as he could. Out of the way, old man, he shouted. The man didn't budge. I mean it. I'll run you over, James said. His ears were getting hot. This asshole was spoiling his mood. Any trace of post-kill bliss left him, and his jaw stiffened. "Screw it," he hissed, and planted his foot to the floor. The stranger's hand shot out, and the car lurched backwards. James let go of the throttle out of reflex. He furrowed his brow and pressed the accelerator again. The car's wheels spun, kicking up a mighty cloud of dust. They spun and spun as the tachometer approached the red line. The stranger didn't move. James must be stuck, that was all. He eased off the power and pushed in the brake. He stomped on the parking brake in anger and reached for the door handle. In the blink of an eye, the stranger disappeared. James blinked in disbelief, but had no time to wonder. His door handle flew out of his hand, and the door was ripped off. It flew off in the night like a missile. James had only a moment to see the stranger standing beside his car before some force grabbed hold of him and threw him out into the night. He had no chance to brace himself before he landed hard on his side. He lay dazed and disoriented. His body felt disconnected and his head felt fuzzy. It was like all this was happening to somebody else. The feeling persisted for about a minute before his senses returned to him. He stood up and looked back at his car. The stranger was standing in front of the open trunk, looking down at Samuel. James felt the blood run out of his face and his tongue tingled. He staggered to his feet and started walking towards the stranger. "Hey, asshole!" he roared. James balled up his fist, not understanding his peril. He pulled the pistol out of his pocket, but when he tried to point it at the stranger, it inexplicably disappeared. He looked at his hand in disbelief, and then at the stranger. The stranger was holding the gun like an apple, considering it before putting it in his blazer coat pocket. "What the hell?" James said in disbelief, and then louder directed at the stranger. "What the hell?" He balled up his fists again and then strode towards the stranger. The stranger still stared at Samuel in the trunk. "Hey, you son of a—" He tried to shout, but the stranger put out his arm and pointed his finger at the ground. It was as if a truck full of sandbags had fallen on his shoulders. James buckled under the weight and was pressed into the soft grass atop the hard ground. James grunted and growled as he tried to free himself from this gravitational force. The stranger lowered his arm and rested his hands on his cane again. The force pressing down on James didn't relent. It was then that the stranger finally spoke. In a deep, even voice, he said, "Did you know that the man you called Samuel turned 204 this year?" "What?" James said as he fought against the immovable force. "He survived the fall of the Golden City, the Trail of 1,000 Nightmares, and a further 60 years here in the realm of man." "You're just like him, full of lies and nonsense." The stranger turned his head sharply and looked down at James. "Just like him?" he said with the pain and rage in his eyes apparent even to the unempathetic soul of James. Somewhere inside James's lizard brain, he understood that the creature before him was more dangerous than anything he could ever have imagined. He ceased to struggle. Fear sunk its icy knife into his heart. "Just like him?" the stranger repeated. "No, I'm nothing like the man you just murdered in cold blood. I am unlike anything your pitiful lot in life has ever witnessed. I am a man of wrath and vengeance, yet that man—" He paused, closing his eyes as he pointed toward Samuel in quiet fury. "That man still chose to be my friend, despite all the darkness I bring with me. He was the most empathetic, kind, and gentle man I have ever known in my long, weary life." James didn't know what to do or say. It was hard to breathe, let alone speak, under the massive weight on his back. The stranger leaned on his cane and walked towards James with a slight limp until he stood a few inches in front of him. James could see the headlamp glinting off his shoes, even through a layer of dust. The stranger dropped down onto his good knee, still holding the cane for support. James's heart pounded against his ribs. "Look at me," the stranger said firmly. Whatever force held James flipped him over to face the dark man's smoldering eyes. James turned his head away and shut his eyes out of the same instincts that screamed of the danger he was in. "I said, look at me, filth!" He yelled with a rage that caused James to unwillingly obey. "That's right. Look into my eyes. I would see the true depth of your depravity before I rendered judgment upon you." James was beyond fear. His mind turned and churned. He flashed to Bill's bloated, decomposing face. his wife under his crushing hands, Samuel laying lifeless in the trunk. Yes, that's it. More, the stranger whispered hypnotically. With his eyes still locked onto the stranger's, he remembered his father's skull cracking under his baseball bat. He remembered the girl in high school who wouldn't put out. He remembered the night he got fed up and dragged her under the bleachers against her will to do what he pleased. The many times he had hammered his fist into some poor fool who had crossed him. Mr. McMiller's blood pooled onto the floor and he shivered in ecstasy. Then he remembered the 2 months he had spent in jail and the group of men that had seized him in the night and... "No! Stop! Please!" James screamed in a shrill voice. "Did you ever relent when others begged you, James? You don't deserve mine or anyone else's mercy. Your soul is as black as pitch. Every step you took in your pathetic, unenlightened life has brought you to this place at my feet. Close your eyes if you can. I'll still scourge all the blackness out of your mind. And oh, such blackness you carry." I'm sorry. Please just let me go." James was crying harder than he ever had in his life. The weight holding him down suddenly relented, but James could only react by curling up into a ball while squeezing his eyes tightly closed. "Yes, that's quite enough, James," the stranger said with calm returning to his voice. He stood up and walked away from James with that shuffling gait of his. The cane made a soft sound as it pressed through the grass gently. James slowly opened his eyes as he choked back down his tears. He felt small and hollow. It was as if the stranger had caused him to vomit all the foul deeds out of his heart. He could see his life clearly for the first time, all the pain he'd caused, all the times he blinded himself to another's pain, and every time he hurt another to soothe his broken soul. He sat up and rose to his feet shakily. The stranger closed the trunk of the Studebaker and turned back towards James. I can do better. I can change. I'll never hurt another soul again, I swear," he pleaded. "Your momentary epiphany will pass, and you'll go back to blaming others for your shortcomings." "No, I won't. I promise," James said with arms outstretched. "I'm a new man." "This is your last night on Earth, James," the stranger said gravely. "You're going to kill me, aren't you?" James asked while swallowing his sorrow. The stranger let out a chuckle. Oh, no, James. You don't understand. I'm not some kind of vigilante killing criminals. I walk in creeping shadows to drag evil into the light, to punish the wicked, to tear the wretched evil from the soul and drag it to where it belongs, to the gray realm where our old gods still live, where aborted terrors lurk in shadows even the most sensitive eyes of the night creatures can't see. Through your own darkness, your crimes come to light. Through your own violence, it is only fitting that violence will be your eternal gift. "Who are you?" James whispered. "My name is Frank Loomis, and I am a friend of the first god. Your black heart is too damaged to be allowed to pass back into the well of souls, worthy of rebirth. You will taint the well and be born again as a bad seed. If I allow this, your trail of atrocities will continue endlessly. Each new life you are given will bring more disease upon the world. Every reincarnation magnifies and multiplies the damage you can cause. It is my job, my duty, to remove you from the cycle so other souls can take your place and be given the chance to live, for I am the Dark Man." James stood there, looking at the stranger. Despite the incredulity of the words he spoke, he knew somehow that everything this dark man said was true. He knew it like he knew water was wet, the sky was up, and the sea was deep. It was a fundamental fact of nature that he was only now, at the end, been exposed to. This was the dark man that Samuel had warned of. Mindlessly, James spun around and ran. In a blind terror, he plunged into the darkness of the night. His legs knew he had to escape this man at any cost. In a desperate flight with no hope and no goal, he ran. For what felt like an eternity, he ran. He ran until something struck his legs and caused him to fall and roll to a stop. He frantically jumped back up to his feet. He looked around him in disbelief. There was a ball of light above him, illuminating the spot he stood upon. Into the spotlight stepped the dark man. Like lightning, the dark man pulled a blade from the cane he held and lashed out at James. The blade punched through the flesh of his shoulder and just as quickly returned back to the cane which the dark man held. James cried out and dropped to his knees. Hot blood flowed through his fingers as he gripped the wound. "Your time is up, James," said the dark man. He tapped his cane on the ground twice, and it reverberated like a massive drum. The world smeared and ran like wet ink, and a deep, low thrum made the world vibrate and shudder for a moment. James looked around desperately, trying to understand. A dark, smoky fog surrounded him. He looked down at the ground, and in the light cast by the orb above, he could see the ground was like black volcanic stone. The thick fog swirled around him, and the dark man stood calmly at his side. "Welcome to your new home. This is the place without death. No matter what affects you, you will heal. No matter how you try to die, you will endure. The creatures of this realm, most of them were once men. The more your body is damaged, the more your soul will bend to mirror your flesh. Eventually, you will become something else, something less than human, and something more as well. You belong to this realm now. I bid you farewell." And with that, the light disappeared, along with the dark man. It took a few seconds for James's eyes to adjust, but when they did, he could only see a short distance into the black fog around him. He waved his hand in disbelief. It was dark here, but not so dark he was blind. He spun around, but there was nothing in every direction. He was feeling lightheaded from blood loss. It was then he heard something. Somewhere out in the gloom, something uttered a series of clicks. He stopped still and listened. Somewhere else, there were another series of clicks, almost like a response to the first. He whirled around, trying to discern where these clicks were coming from. There was nothing in the gloom for him to orient himself to. The only things he knew were up and down, and even those were questionable. There was another clicking, and another, each time James spun to try and see what was making the noise. Then there was a single loud snapping click directly behind him. He spun around to face something striding out of the fog. It looked like a human, but pale and walking on all fours. Its limbs were impossibly long and spindly. Its head was far too large to be natural, and was misshapen by a large mound of flesh on the top, like some creature whose brain had grown too big for his body. As it closed with him in the fog, he could see the slight greenish-yellow pallor of its sickly skin. He could see its eyes. "My God," James whispered in terror. Its eyes were huge and coated in cataracts, but also seemed to reflect light like a dog's eyes in headlights. Its mouth hung open, and a string of brown sick drooled from its transparent, sharp teeth. It moved in jerky spurts, and seemed not to be able to decide which eye to look at him with. What was he to do? Another series of clicks seemed to be approaching from behind him, but he did not dare take his eye off the creature in front of him. Had this been a man once? Is this what was to become of him? A fifth limb started to rise out of the back of the creature. It seemed to be a spidery appendage with its sharp, transparent tip. As he stared in disbelief, it protruded up above the creature. The distorted man-like creature rose up to the full height his distorted limbs allowed him, and then with a speed so sudden and surreal, it impaled James with the protruding spike. It punched into the very spot the dark men had wounded him. With his very soul, James let out a howl of pain and fear. The creature opened its filthy mouth to an impossible gape, and its face grew closer. There was no mercy in this thing's eyes, only an eldritch hunger. And with that hunger, it bit down on James' head. James lost consciousness, and the creature gathered him up with one of its spindly arms. And then, silently, it disappeared into the fog to feed on James in its forsaken nest somewhere. To feed and feed as James healed and awoke 1,000 more times until, finally, James became something else as well. Something more. Something damned. The end.